Hey everyone, welcome back to Everyday English Pod. We talk a lot about communication skills here, and today we're zeroing in on something that can make or break your career, nailing those business
Oh,
presentations.
for sure. Doesn't matter if you're prepping for a huge meeting, just trying to get better at talking to people, or even just curious about what makes a presentation stand out. This is going to be useful stuff.
Totally. We had the chance to listen to this really interesting conversation, and let me tell you, it was packed with insights about how to take your presentations to a whole new level. We're talking actionable tips, the kind you can use right away, so think of this as us doing the heavy lifting and giving you the best of the best.
Exactly. We're going to break down everything from that crucial first impression to how to leave a lasting impact on your audience.
Okay, so let's jump right in with the opening. The discussion really hammered home how important that first impression is. Like, you got to grab your listeners' attention right off the bat. They talked about using a startling statistic or well-placed story. What makes those so effective?
Well, think about it, your audience. They're busy people,
Yeah.
right? Their minds are probably racing with a million things. A powerful statistic or a story that really resonates with them, especially one that speaks to their work life, it's like a wake-up call.
Right, like, hey, this is actually relevant to me.
Exactly. It cuts through all the noise and says, listen up, this is going to be valuable.
I like that. Now, what about starting with a question? That seemed to be a big hit in the discussion, too.
Oh, it's a fantastic way to get those mental gears turning right from the start. Not just a yes or no kind of question, but something that makes them think, sparks their curiosity. The more they're actively consider the topic, the more invested they become in what you have to say.
It's like planting a seed, right? Gets their brains working. They also talked about making sure you emphasize your main objective right away. Why is that so crucial?
It's like giving your audience a map. When they understand your core purpose from the get-go, they have the context for everything that follows. They can filter information, prioritize what's important, and ultimately, it just makes the whole experience smoother for everyone.
They know where you're going with it.
Exactly. Now, here's something that I found particularly interesting. They talked about weaving in a brief personal story. Now, how does something personal fit into a professional presentation?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's all about human connection. In a business setting, it's easy to get bogged down in data, charts, all that stuff. But a genuine personal story, something short and sweet, it injects that human element. You become relatable, you build trust, and people remember stories way more than just dry facts.
It's like that saying, people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel.
Exactly. And even sharing a small struggle you overcame, something relevant to your topic, can be incredibly impactful.
So vulnerability builds trust. Makes sense. Now, they also mentioned displaying a simple but powerful image right at the beginning. That felt a bit unexpected in a business context. What's the thought process there?
Well, we're visual creatures. A striking image can bypass all that logical thinking and tap right into emotions or create instant curiosity. It sets the mood, grabs attention, and it's a really memorable way to kick things off a visual hook, if you will.
Got it. So it's kind of like setting the stage. They talked a lot about rehearsing your opening, which makes sense, but they also stressed being adaptable. How do you balance those two?
Practice is key, for sure. You want to sound polished, but not like a robot,
Oh.
right? But you also need to be able to read the room. If something isn't landing the way you expected, you got to be able to adjust your approach on the fly. It's about being prepared but flexible.
Okay, I get it. Now, why is it so important to keep your welcome concise? Why not have a nice long intro?
Momentum, my friend. Your audience is there to hear what you have to say, not a lengthy welcome. A long intro can actually drain their energy before you even get to the meat of your presentation. Keep it short and sweet, and you'll keep them engaged.
Straight to the point. They also suggested getting feedback on that initial hook. Why is that so helpful?
What you find interesting might not resonate with everyone, right? Getting feedback from someone else helps you see if your opening actually grabs attention and builds excitement. It's a reality check to make sure you're on the right track.
A fresh perspective is always good. Now, the last point about the opening was emphasizing the main benefit right up front. Why is that so crucial for holding people's attention?
It answers the what's in it for me question right away. Everyone's thinking it right. By clearly explaining the value they'll get from listening, you immediately give them a reason to invest their time and attention. You're showing them why they should care.
So you're essentially giving them a reason to stay tuned.
Exactly. Motivate them right from the start.
All right, we've got the opening down. Let's move on to slide design. Something that really jumped out was the advice to only highlight key points and cut out all those overwhelming details. Why is that so important for good slide design?
It's all about focus. Your slides should support your message, not steal the show. Overcrowded slides full of text just become distractions. People end up reading instead of listening to you. By keeping it simple, you make it easier for them to absorb your verbal message, which is where the real depth and context is.
So less is more.
Absolutely. Think of it this way. People usually remember only a few key points from a presentation. Focus on those and cut out the fluff.
Fewer bullet points per slide, that makes sense too. How does that help the audience?
It creates a visual hierarchy. It guides them through your message step by step without overwhelming them with too much at once. Makes it easier to follow your logic and digest the information.
Okay, so visual organization is key. What about visuals like graphs and images? When are those most effective, and how do you make sure they actually add value?
They're great for explaining complex data or abstract ideas, making them easier to grasp and remember. But the key word is relevant. They need to directly support your point, not just be there for decoration. Ask yourself, does this visual help people understand what I'm saying? If not, ditch it.
So form follows function. They also touched on color palettes, talking about consistency versus variation. What's the best approach there?
A consistent color palette across your slides gives a professional and harmonious look. But you can use subtle color variations to highlight different sections or emphasize key data points. The key is subtle. Avoid anything too flashy or jarring that could distract from your message.
Got it. Subtlety is key. What about adding short captions under images? Seems like a small detail, but they made a point of mentioning it.
Those captions provide instant context and ensure everyone understands why you're showing that image. It connects a visual to your spoken words, so nothing gets lost in translation.
It makes sense. It's all about that clarity, right? Keeping the text minimal overall that keeps coming up. Why is that less is more approach so important for slide text?
Think of your slides as the backup singers, not the main act. Fewer words mean you get to elaborate more verbally, providing richer details and explanations. Too much text, and people zone out.
They start reading ahead instead of listening.
Exactly. Now, something that people often overlook is the font. What kind of fonts work best for presentations on a screen? Readability is paramount. Clean, sans serif fonts like Arial or Calibri are your best bet. They look modern and are easier on the eyes, especially when projected on a large screen.
So clean and simple wins again. What about slide transitions? They talked about consistent but subtle transitions. What's the purpose there?
Transitions should guide your audience from one slide to the next without jarring them. Avoid anything flashy or overly animated. Think of them as gentle nudges that help the presentation flow smoothly.
Okay, seamless transitions. They also talked about embedding video clips, which can be risky. What are the pros and cons?
Short, relevant clips can be engaging. They can show a product feature or illustrate a concept in a really dynamic way. But if they're too long, poorly made, or don't support your main points, they can really disrupt the flow. So use them sparingly and strategically.
I see. Quality over quantity. Now, what about using contrasting color backgrounds to emphasize different sections? That can add visual interest, but how do you avoid visual overload?
It's all about balance. Contrasting colors can help separate sections, but they shouldn't be jarring or strain the eyes. Go for softer contrasts and make sure the color shift has a clear purpose, not just random variation.
So don't just throw in random colors for the sake of it. Got it. They also stressed making sure your slides flow logically one to the next. How does that help keep the audience engaged?
A logical flow is like the backbone of your presentation story. When each slide builds on the previous one, it helps your audience follow your argument, understand the connections between your ideas. It makes the whole experience more cohesive and engaging.
Right, like a well-structured story. Now, the last point on slide design was about practicing with your final slides. Why is that so crucial?
It's your dress rehearsal. You get a real feel for the timing, see if there are any awkward transitions or if anything clashes visually or verbally. It's essential for delivering a presentation that's polished and confident.
All right, so we've covered crafting a strong opening and designing effective slides. Now let's talk about your voice mastering vocal delivery. They started with vocal projection. How do you command attention without shouting at people?
It's finding that sweet spot. Project your voice so everyone can hear you comfortably, but don't be aggressive or overbearing. It's about clarity and confidence, using your diaphragm to support your voice, not just raising your volume.
So it's about power, not just loudness.
Exactly. Now, keeping a steady pace and controlling your speaking rate, why is that so important?
So people can actually understand you.
That's a big part of it. If you speak too fast, people can't process what you're saying. But a steady pace allows them to follow your thoughts, understand your arguments, and actually remember the information.
Makes sense. They also talked about those pesky filler words like and ah. Any tips for breaking that habit?
My favorite technique is to replace them with pauses. Instead of umming while you think, just be silent for a moment. It makes you seem more in control, and it gives the audience a moment to digest what you just said.
Win-win. What about varying your tone of voice? How does that keep things interesting and highlight important ideas?
It's like adding punctuation to your speech. You can emphasize key points, signal transitions, and just make your delivery more dynamic. A monotone voice, no matter how good the content is, can be a real snooze fest.
I've definitely zoned out during those. They also talked about facial expressions. How do those help humanize your points?
It's all about showing your enthusiasm and making that connection with your audience. Facial expressions add a human touch, they make you relatable, and they make your message feel more genuine.
They see you're invested in what you're saying. Now, what about hand gestures? How do you use those effectively without being distracting?
Hand gestures can be powerful tools to emphasize points and reinforce your arguments. But the key is to be deliberate. Don't just fidget or wave your hands around randomly. Use them intentionally to complement your words.
So purposeful movement, I like it. They suggested recording yourself practicing. Why is it so valuable to actually see yourself presenting?
You pick up on things you wouldn't notice otherwise. Maybe your posture needs work or you're not making enough eye contact. These things are crucial for projecting confidence and keeping your audience engaged, and sometimes you need to see it to believe it.
It's like getting an outside perspective on yourself.
Exactly. Speaking of perspective, they talked about speaking with passion. How does that impact your audience?
Well, if you're not excited about your topic, why should they be?
You got it. Passion is contagious. When your audience senses your enthusiasm, they're more likely to buy into your message. It shows you believe in what you're saying, and that energy can be really powerful.
It's authentic. They mentioned controlling nerves with breathing exercises. How does that help with your voice specifically?
Deep breathing calms your nerves, which helps stabilize your voice. It reduces tension in your vocal cords, so you can start strong and maintain a clear, confident tone throughout.
So it's not just about feeling calm, it actually impacts how you sound.
Exactly. Rehearsing transitions between sections. Why is that so important?
So you don't sound choppy or like you're jumping around randomly.
Exactly. When you practice those transitions, your speech flows naturally, making it easier for your audience to follow along. It creates a more cohesive and engaging experience.
It's like the glue that holds it all together. What about pausing after a complex point? How does that help?
Pauses give your audience a moment to process what you've just said, especially after a complex point. It shows respect for their understanding and gives them time to really absorb the information.
So it's about letting things sink in.
Absolutely. Now, they also mentioned humor. How do you use humor effectively without bombing?
That's a good question. I've definitely seen presentations where the jokes fall flat.
The key is to keep it light and relevant. Humor can be a great way to break the ice and make you more relatable, but it needs to be appropriate for the audience and the topic. When in doubt, err on the side of caution.
Better safe than sorry. What about having a vocal warm-up routine? Why is that important?
Just like athletes warm up before a game, warming up your voice helps ensure clear enunciation. It loosens up your vocal cords so you can deliver your message clearly and confidently without mumbling or stumbling over your words.
So no tongue twisters needed, but a little warm-up goes a long way. And the final point on vocal delivery was practicing until you feel comfortable with the material. Why is that so crucial?
Consistent practice builds muscle memory, both for your voice and your presentation flow. This frees you up to focus on connecting with your audience rather than worrying about what you're going to say next. You'll be more confident and it'll show.
Okay, let's move on to something that can be nerve-wracking. The Q&A session. They started with anticipating challenging questions. How do you prepare for the unexpected?
Think about the tough questions, the potential pushback you might get. Brainstorm those points where your data could be questioned or where people might disagree. Crafting responses in advance will make you feel more prepared and confident when those curveballs come your way.
So it's about being one step ahead. What about staying composed when you do get a tough question? That can be tough to do on the spot.
Take a breath. That moment of pause gives you time to collect your thoughts. Then address the core issue directly, without getting defensive or emotional. Stay calm and professional, even if you feel like you're being attacked.
Don't take it personally.
Exactly. They also suggested having supporting evidence and backup slides ready. How does that help?
I guess it shows you've done your homework.
Exactly. It reassures your audience that you're prepared and can handle those tough questions. It shows you've thought things through and you're not just making things up on the spot.
It backs up your claims. They also talked about acknowledging valid criticisms up front. Why is that a good strategy?
Honesty and transparency build trust. If someone raises a legitimate concern, acknowledge it. It shows you're open to feedback and creates a more respectful and constructive dialogue.
So you're not just dismissing their concerns.
Exactly. They suggested rephrasing a tough question before answering it. What's the benefit there?
To make sure you understand it correctly.
That, and it gives you a few extra seconds to think about your response. It also clarifies the question for everyone else and shows the person asking that you've really listened to their concern.
So it's about clarity and respect. What about body language during Q&A? Any tips for projecting confidence when you're under pressure?
Even if you're feeling flustered, maintain eye contact, keep an open posture, and try to relax your facial expressions. These nonverbal cues project confidence and make your answers seem more credible. Avoid crossing your arms or looking away. That just makes you look defensive.
So project that confidence even if you don't feel it at first. They also talked about redirecting broad or off-topic questions. How do you do that politely?
It's about acknowledging the question, but gently steering the conversation back to your main points. You could say something like, that's an interesting point and it touches on a broader issue, but today we're focusing specifically on.
So you acknowledge their point but keep things on track.
Right. What about when you're dealing with opposing viewpoints? How do you handle that?
I guess try to find some common ground.
Exactly. Focus on the things you agree on. Highlight the shared goals or priorities. It can really help de-escalate tension and create a more collaborative atmosphere.
It turns it into a problem-solving discussion, not a debate. They also emphasized thanking the person asking the question, even if it's tough. Why is that so important?
It shows respect and professionalism. It acknowledges their engagement and makes them feel heard. And honestly, it just makes you look good.
It's just good manners. They suggested practicing Q&A scenarios beforehand. How helpful is that?
Super helpful. It helps you think through different questions, get comfortable articulating your responses, and figure out where you might need more information.
So it's like a test run for the real deal.
Exactly. And it reveals any blind spots in your knowledge.
They also talked about bridging techniques to steer a question back to your main points. Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say someone asked a question that's slightly off topic. You could say, that's an interesting angle, and it relates to some of the underlying principles we discussed earlier regarding that. That way, you acknowledge their question, but bring the focus back to your core message.
So it's like a gentle redirect.
Exactly. Now, what about having a cheat sheet for the Q&A? What kind of things should be on it?
Like key data points or talking points?
Precisely. Things like key statistics, brief reminders of your main arguments, anything that helps you recall crucial information quickly without having to scramble.
So it's like your security blanket. They also stressed listening carefully to each question before jumping in with an answer. Why is that so important?
Active listening shows respect and ensures you understand the question before you answer. This leads to more targeted responses and avoids misunderstandings.
It prevents you from going off on a tangent about something completely different.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears and talk about structuring your content. They started with arranging your main points logically. How do you achieve that?
It's like telling a story, right? Everything should flow naturally.
You got it. Your main points should build on each other, creating a coherent narrative. This helps your audience follow your line of reasoning and understand how everything fits together.
It's like building a house, brick by brick.
Perfect analogy. Now, what about grouping related points together? How does that help?
It keeps things organized and prevents information overload.
Exactly. Grouping related ideas under broader themes makes your presentation more digestible. It helps your audience see the big picture and remember the key takeaways.
It creates those mental categories.
Precisely. Now, they also talked about starting with a high-level overview or an executive summary. What's the purpose of that?
I guess it sets the stage and gives the audience a roadmap.
You nailed it. It provides context and helps your audience understand how the different parts of your presentation fit together. It's like giving them a sneak peek of the journey ahead.
And it helps them prioritize what to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Now, what about the order of information? Should you present your key arguments first or the supporting data?
I'd say start with your strongest arguments to grab attention.
You're on the right track. Leading with your critical arguments establishes your main points right away. Then you can follow up with data and evidence to support those claims. It's like stating your case and then presenting the evidence.
Like a lawyer in court. They also cautioned against overwhelming your audience with too many subpoints. How do you decide what to cut?
Focus on what directly supports your main arguments and your overall objectives. Be ruthless in cutting anything that's not essential or that doesn't add significant value. Remember, keep it concise.
Okay, so quality over quantity yet again. What about recaps? They talked about summarizing after each main section. Why is that beneficial?
It's like giving your audience a chance to catch their breath. Those brief recaps help them solidify what they've learned before you move on. It reinforces understanding and improves their retention of the information.
It's like those chapter summaries in a book.
Exactly. They also stressed using transition statements between sections. Can you give some examples?
Things like building on that idea, or now let's turn our attention to.
Exactly. Those phrases act as bridges, guiding your audience smoothly from one topic to the next. They create a seamless flow and prevent your presentation from feeling choppy or disjointed.
It's like those smooth camera transitions in a film.
Love that analogy. Now, what about real-life examples? How do those help?
Well, they make things more concrete and relatable, right?
Precisely. Real-life examples or case studies help people see how the information you're presenting applies in the real world. It makes it more tangible, more memorable, and easier to understand.
It brings it to life. They also advised limiting each slide to just one main takeaway. Why is that so important?
One slide, one key message. This prevents information overload and keeps your audience focused. It's about delivering your message with clarity and impact without overwhelming them with too much at once.
So it's about prioritizing and distilling the information. Now, what about the conclusion? They talked about ending strong and summarizing your main points. Why is that so crucial?
The conclusion is your last chance to leave a lasting impression. Summarizing your main points reinforces your key message and gives your audience a clear sense of what you want them to take away from your presentation. It ties everything together nicely.
It's like the final bow in a performance.
Perfect. They also suggested using verbal cues to signal transitions. Can you give some examples?
Like saying, the first key takeaway is, or moving on to our next point.
Exactly. Those little phrases help your audience follow along and know when you're shifting gears. It keeps them oriented and prevents them from getting lost.
It's like giving them a roadmap of your presentation. They also talked about cutting repetition. Why is conciseness so important?
Repetition can make your presentation feel long and tedious. A lean, purposeful framework ensures that every point you make has impact and keeps your audience engaged from start to finish.
So edit ruthlessly. Okay, let's talk about visual aids. They started with using charts and diagrams to illustrate data. How do you make sure those visuals actually help and don't just confuse people further?
Keep it simple. Charts and diagrams should clarify data, not complicate it. Avoid anything overly intricate or data-heavy. The goal is to make complex information easier to grasp, not add to the confusion.
So think visually appealing, but also easy to understand.
Exactly. They also talked about choosing high contrast colors, especially for larger audiences. Why is that so important?
Well, if people can't read the text, the visual is useless.
Right. High contrast colors ensure that your text and visuals are legible even from the back of the room. It's about making sure everyone can access the information without straining their eyes.
Accessibility is key. Now, they caution against overusing visuals. What's a good rule of thumb to follow?
Each visual should have a clear purpose. Ask yourself, does this image or chart directly support the point I'm making? If not, it's probably just a distraction.
So every visual needs to earn its place. What about annotating graphs? How does that help the audience?
Annotations are like little guides that highlight the key takeaways. They direct attention to the most important trends or data points, ensuring everyone understands the significance of the visual and doesn't miss those crucial insights.
It's like providing a roadmap for interpreting the data. They also touched on using minimal animations. What kind of animations should you avoid?
Anything overly flashy or distracting. Those spinning text animations or crazy transitions might look cool, but they take the focus away from your message. Subtle animations that reveal information step by step are fine, but keep it professional.
So subtle and purposeful animations are okay.
Exactly. What about using video clips, especially for demonstrating product features?
I guess short clips can be engaging, but they could also be disruptive if they're not done well.
You hit the nail on the head. Short, high-quality videos can be great for showing off features or illustrating concepts, but they need to be concise, relevant, and seamlessly integrated into your presentation. Don't let the video overshadow your message.
So it's a supporting role, not the lead actor.
Absolutely. Now, what about using infographics? They seem to be big fans of those.
I guess they can be a great way to present complex information visually.
Exactly. A well-designed infographic can simplify complex data and make it more engaging and memorable. They're great for combining visuals with concise text to make information more accessible.
It's about making things easy to digest. They stress the importance of explaining visuals verbally rather than just assuming the audience will get it. Why is that?
Never assume your audience will interpret visuals the way you intended. Always take a moment to explain the key takeaways from each chart or graph. It reinforces your message and ensures everyone understands the significance of what they're seeing.
So don't just show, tell.
Exactly. And when you're presenting data, focus on the key metrics, the things that really matter. Don't overload your audience with too much detail.
Right, highlight the key takeaways. They also suggested using icons to represent key terms. What's the thinking there?
Icons can be powerful visual cues. They can add visual interest and make it easier for your audience to remember key concepts. Just make sure the icons are relevant and used consistently.
So it's adding a visual element to reinforce the words. They also liked incorporating interactive elements like polls or questions. How do those help?
They're great for keeping people engaged. It makes your audience feel like they're part of the presentation, not just passive listeners. It can be as simple as asking them to guess a trend before revealing a chart. Little things like that can really make a difference.
It keeps them on their toes. Now, what about image quality? They stressed using high-resolution images. Why is that so important?
Image quality is a reflection of your professionalism. Blurry or pixelated images look sloppy and undermine your credibility. High-resolution images show you care about the details and that you respect your audience's time.
It's like dressing sharp for a presentation.
Exactly. First impressions matter. Now, what about color coding in multidimensional charts?
I guess that helps differentiate between data sets.
Precisely. Color coding makes those complex charts much easier to understand. It helps your audience make quick and accurate comparisons without getting lost in a sea of data points.
So it's all about clarity and organization.
Exactly. And finally, when it comes to your slides, make sure the visual elements are well integrated into the overall layout. It should look polished and professional, like a cohesive package.
Like everything has its place.
Right. A visually appealing slide deck enhances your message and keeps your audience engaged. It's like the difference between a handwritten note and a beautifully designed card.
All right, so we've covered a lot about the visuals. Let's talk about keeping your audience engaged throughout the entire presentation. Besides a good opening, what are some other strategies?
You can sprinkle in interactive moments throughout, like those polls we discussed earlier. They're great for re-energizing the room and keeping people involved.
It's like a mini break for their brains.
Exactly. You can also vary your speaking pace. Speed up a bit during less critical parts to inject energy, but slow down when you're delivering key information to ensure clarity.
So it's about creating a dynamic rhythm.
Precisely. Now, remember those rhetorical questions we talked about earlier? They're also great for prompting reflection and keeping people engaged.
So it's not about getting an answer, it's about making them think.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of stories. Sprinkle in relevant anecdotes or case studies to make your points more vivid and relatable.
People connect with stories. What about vocal variety? Why is that so important?
It keeps things interesting. Varying your pitch, tone, and intensity helps emphasize key points and prevents you from sounding monotonous. No one wants to listen to a robot, right?
Definitely not. Now, they talked about using props. When are those effective?
A well-chosen prop can really bring a point to life and make it more memorable, but use them sparingly. The prop should directly illustrate your message, not distract from it.
So it's about enhancing, not distracting.
Precisely. And remember, humor can be a great tool, but it needs to be tasteful and appropriate for the audience.
No offensive jokes.
Exactly. Keep it light, relevant, and culturally sensitive. Now, what about directly referencing your audience's experiences? Why is that a good idea?
I guess it makes them feel like you're speaking directly to them.
Exactly. When you acknowledge their industry, their roles, their challenges, you make your presentation feel much more relevant and personal. It shows you understand their world.
It creates that connection. They also talked about offering teasers about upcoming information. Why is that effective?
It builds anticipation. It's like saying, hey, stick with me. There's some really cool stuff coming up. It gives them a reason to stay tuned.
It's like the preview for a movie.
Exactly. Now, remember those recaps we talked about earlier? Those are also great for maintaining engagement throughout the presentation. They remind people of what you've covered and keep everyone on the same page.
It's like those previously on segments in a TV show. What about movement and posture on stage?
Confidence is key. Stand tall, use purposeful movements, and make eye contact. It projects authority and shows you're engaged with your audience. Avoid pacing aimlessly, but don't be afraid to move around and use the space.
So it's about commanding the stage.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to use pauses strategically. A well-timed pause can create suspense and emphasize key points.
It's like the dramatic silence before a big reveal. Now, the last point on engagement was about reading the room. Why is that so important?
You need to be aware of your audience's reactions. If you sense they're getting bored or disengaged, you need to adapt. Maybe pick up the pace, add more interaction, or adjust your content slightly. It shows you're responsive to their needs.
It's all about being flexible and in tune with your audience.
Exactly. Now, let's dive into the all-important practice phase. First up, multiple practice sessions. Why is repetition so key?
Practice makes perfect, or at least closer to it.
You got it. Practice helps you internalize your content, refine your delivery, and smooth out any rough spots. It builds confidence and makes your presentation feel natural and effortless.
So don't wing it. They also stress timing each section during practice. Why is that so important?
It helps you manage your time effectively. You don't want to run out of time before covering all your key points. Timing ensures you can deliver your entire message within the allotted time frame without rushing.
So it's about respecting everyone.